This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation. Tonight, Britain is set to see the biggest exodus of millionaires in the world as the government's planned raid on non-doms forced wealth creators to flee, taking their prosperity and taxes with them. It's not the rich who will suffer, it's everybody else. 4 becomes 3. Tom Tugendhat bows out of the Conservative leadership race after failing to secure the backing of MPs. James Cleverly storms ahead of Robert Jenrick. So what do the final 3 need to do to reign victorious with both the Tory faithful and the country at large? The UK population has soared at its highest rate of growth since the early 1970s because of uncontrolled levels of immigration. How long can this go on before Britain bursts at the seams? All this as the ACHR allows an Albanian criminal back into the country after being deported. How are we to reclaim control of our own borders? And new research shows the over 57s are facing disadvantages when searching for jobs, as employers see this as the age where hiring becomes less appealing. As productivity slumps and the people live longer, can we afford to be throwing away such a valuable and experienced workforce? State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my most cantankerous panel, both of them, I think, just over 57, but still working, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the journalist and author, Michael Crick. As always, I want to know your views. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's your favourite part of the day, the news with Lewis Mackenzie.
Favourite part of the show indeed. Good evening. Thank you very much, Jacob. It's 8 o'clock. I'm Lewis Mackenzie here in the GB newsroom. Now, James Cleverly has overtaken Robert Jenrick to the top spot at the latest round of voting to be the next leader of the Conservative Party. Cleverly leads the pack with 39 votes, Robert Jenrick second with 31 and Kemi Badenoch third on 30. Tom Tugendhat has now been eliminated from the race with only 20 votes. The final 2 will be decided from the remaining 3 candidates at the next round of voting tomorrow afternoon. The Director General of MI5 has warned that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are on the rise again, with an increase of the terror risk linked to the conflict in the Middle East. In a stark warning at the Counter-Terrorism Operations Centre, Ken McCullen revealed that Iran has been linked to at least 20 deadly plots in the UK over the past 2 years. He says both groups are attempting to export terror, highlighting the recently deadly attack in Moscow as a brutal demonstration of what ISIS is still capable of. And as the conflict between Israel and Iran intensifies, MI5 is on high alert for potential domestic repercussions. Keir Starmer is set for crucial talks in Berlin, joining leaders from the US, France, Germany this Saturday. The meeting will focus on the ongoing war in Ukraine and the escalating situation in the Middle East. It comes as tensions rise in Lebanon, prompting urgent diplomatic efforts among the so-called Quad nations. The Prime Minister's spokesman says the meeting highlights the UK's commitment to tackling international issues alongside its allies. Water companies in England and Wales have been ordered to return more than £157 million to customers for failing to meet their crucial targets on pollution and interrupting supplies. Ofwat has demanded the money comes off bills for households and businesses from next year. It follows a previous order to repay £114 million from last year. The UK population has seen its largest annual increase in size since 1971. The Office for National Statistics estimates the population grew by 1% in just 1 year, reaching 68.3 million by mid-2023, covering England, Scotland, Wales and, of course, Northern Ireland. The ONS says migration was the main factor, behind the latest rise, as deaths exceeded births by around 16,300 in the same period. And finally, as Hurricane Milton makes its way towards Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis says if you stay, you will die. Satellite images show the storm churning through the Gulf of Mexico, with winds reaching almost up to 180 miles an hour, with forecasters warning of an 8 to 12-foot storm surge, the highest ever for the region, and of course widespread flooding. It comes just 2 weeks after Hurricane Helene claimed over 200 lives in the southeastern part of the country. Well, those are your latest GB News headlines. I'm Lewis Mackenzie. More from me in an hour's time, but now, back to Jacob.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. Labour's class warfare is back on the agenda, and the consequences will damage your wealth. It's easy to attack rich people, and the idea of taxing millionaires sounds appealing. But the truth is, we need these rich individuals to stay in the United Kingdom. They don't just sit on piles of money. They invest in businesses, create jobs, and drive economic growth. When they leave, it's not only their tax revenue that goes with them, it's the jobs, the innovation and the investment. And they will leave if we make it harder for them to stay, make it less profitable for them to stay. We've already had a taste of what is to come if we carry on down this path. Recent analysis shows that the share of millionaires in the UK is set to fall by 20% over the next 5 years. Countries like Germany and France, and indeed even Italy, are set to gain millionaires while Britain is losing them. Why? Because our tax system is becoming increasingly hostile to wealth creators. People are preparing to pack their bags, and they're not just worried about income or inheritance tax. It's the non-refundable VAT. It's the proposed exit taxes. Rich people don't need to stay here. Many of them are mobile, and they will leave if taxes are too high. They can live anywhere they please, and many are already leaving for fear of what will be in the budget. While I was in government, I argued for return to the non-dom rules as they were when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister, before all the tinkering, the changes that began to frighten them away. Tax, after all, is about getting the most number of feathers from the goose with the least amount of hissing. It's about practicality, not morality. It's not about punishing people for being successful. It's making sure that the system works for everybody, that you have the most economically advantageous, the wisest tax system. And if these non-dom policies push more people to leave, we'll have less money in the economy, which means less money for public services, and the least well-off suffer the most. That is what socialist class war, economics leads to, as the late, great Margaret Thatcher once put it.
Rather the poor were poorer, provided the rich were less rich. That way you will never create the wealth for better social services as we have.
And that's absolutely right. The left would prefer that the poor are poorer as long as the rich were less rich. It's utter madness, and the rich already pay a disproportionate share of tax. The top 1% of earners contribute nearly 30% of all income tax, while in 1979, when the top tax rate was 98%, they paid 6% of all tax. Their departure isn't just a minor inconvenience, it's a massive hit to the exchequer and the economy. Some economists are already calling for an exit tax, which is encouraging people to pack their bags already. But forcing people to pay capital gains tax on unrealised assets as they leave isn't going to make them stay. It's only get them out of the door faster. This isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about the future of the British economy. We need to be keeping the best and the brightest talent from around the world, not driving away even our own citizens. The government needs to rethink this policy before it's too late. Because once they're gone, it's much harder to get them back. They are gone. And we will be left with a weaker economy, less money for the very public services the Labour Party says it wants to protect. And the poorest in our country will become poorer still. As ever, send in the male Moggs. Well, one such wealth creator who has decided to take his riches elsewhere is the very well-known founder of Pimlico Plumbers, Charlie Mullins. Charlie, thank you very much for joining me.
Yeah.
Are you still just about in the UK, or have you already fled to lower tax pastures?
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word fled, but I've left. purely because of Labour's taxes and the increases they're going to bring out in the future, inheritance tax, capital gains, raise the tax rate. And, you know, they're penalising the wrong people. So it's the entrepreneurs, the risk takers, the business people that create wealth, that create jobs, that, you know, put more into the economy, but they're driving them out. And if they do this leaving tax, there's no way possible will people ever return. It's like you're in a restaurant, you've already paid the bill, but because you leave before it closes, they want to charge you again. Honestly, Labour is a crazy idea, and it would drive more and more millionaires. I believe more millionaires are going to leave the UK than any other country in the next few years. And already 10,000 are going to be leaving this year. So Labour needs to relook at it and come up with another idea to raise money rather than penalising wealthy or successful people. They despise wealthy people, as you know.
Well, they actually say they want to grow the economy, but surely the best way to grow the economy is to keep your wealth creators in the country rather than push them out. Well,
anybody with half a brain can work that one out, but for some reason, you know, they don't seem to. They obviously must understand what they're doing, but, you know, they've always despised wealthy people. They're socialists, and they need to just change their plan, or they're going to bankrupt the UK very quickly. We need to be giving incentives to people to stay, not penalise them to leave and raising taxes. Well, I mean, I've gone to Spain, as you know, and I won't be coming back. I will not be coming back when Labour are in power and with their stupid, idiotic tax laws. None of them have got a day's work in between them. We're just going from bad to worse, and somebody needs to speak up and put a stop to these idiots, if I'm being honest. Sorry for being rude, but that's what they are.
No, that's all right. But Charlie, do you feel this is patriotic? Don't you feel you should stay in the UK and you should fight the good fight and you should, excuse me, help the Conservatives or Reform to win an election so we get a low-tax economy that you would like?
Well, that's a simple answer, no. I've been paying into the system for 55 years. I put over £200 million in tax and national insurance, and people start telling me I'm not patriotic. I cannot do no more than what I've done. They're driving us out. They're forcing us out. It's an hard decision to leave the UK. So should I be staying and fighting? The answer is no, because we're on a losing battle unless more people like me are prepared to stand up and tell them that they've got it wrong. It's a crazy idea. So no, I don't. You know, I wish I wasn't leaving. I wish I was, like, you know, contributing more. I've got a new company in the UK which is family run, WeFix, and I'm not on the payroll, but they're compliant with all the UK tax laws. But if they make it too difficult for the company, they'll just move to Dubai, like many other people.
Are a lot of your friends also leaving? Are you part of a trend that you're noticing of wealthy people who are leaving the UK at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, Alfie Best has gone. I mean, billionaire, he's gone. He's had enough of it because of the same thing, because of the stupidity of what the Labour are trying to penalise successful people. And, you know, I know it's not about all the illegals, but they're giving out money to people that don't contribute nothing to society. It's so wrong. I mean, they will break the UK, and then hopefully another whatever you call it will get in. I can't remember what you are. Like, another party will get in. Sorry, and we'll have to straighten it out again. I mean, they will destroy the UK. They've only been in 3 or 4 months, and look at the damage they've done already.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Charlie. Thank you for joining us. And I hope you'll use your 90 days to come back to the UK and cheer everybody up from time to time. But I'm joined now by the Director of Research at the Adam Smith Institute, Maxwell Marley. Maxwell, the truth is the government needs money, that we are spending too much, we are at over 100% debt to GDP. The rich seem an easy target for any government, and particularly for Rachel Reeves when she's short of cash.
I think you're completely correct here, Jacob. Look, here's the issue, right? I mean, we have taxes at an all-time high. The Adam Smith Institute does Tax Freedom Day every year. This year, the average taxpayer in the UK worked for 161 days for the Treasury and not for themselves. And when we look at the rich, the entrepreneurs, the founders, the innovators, people who are taking really large risks, they are getting taxed to the hilt. And you mentioned earlier, you know, the top 1% pay about 30% of income tax. Well, actually, if you take the number of millionaires in the UK, about 4.62% of the entire population, that's about the 5% of the overall taxpayers. They pay 50% of income tax, so they are easy to go for, really simple. However, you're scaring them off, and that's what our research today is showing.
But most of the 4.6% of millionaires can't go because they own a house in Surrey and it's worth £1 million and they don't have the flexibility. So of that 4.6%, any relatively small number have the freedom, the flexibility to disappear?
Well, we'd call those people who can move around, the highly mobile, wealthy individuals. They're called liquid millionaires. So they've got about £1 million or $1 million, as the international term is, of easily accessible, investable incomes. That could be cash, that could be assets in a fund or shares, whatever else. They can move very easily. So a study by New World Wealth and Henley Partners forecast for this year 9,500 of them leaving, which is second only to China. But we have taken a look at a lot of these numbers and taken into general account the total millionaires, including those people with houses and other assets they can't move around. We think by 2028 you'll see a 20% reduction in the overall number of millionaires in the UK.
And of those liquid millionaires, how many of them are foreign and how many of them are British? Do you have the figures on that?
Well, unfortunately, it's quite hard to get a hold of. We take a lot of time looking at HMRC and Treasury data over this stuff. You can't dig in and find out who is who. But what we can say is that the non-dom regime, which is, going to be totally upended, well, we assume so. There's a lot of uncertainty, as you know, Jacob, and as viewers at home will know. The issue we've got here is that now we're seeing, and as Charlie was saying, people just flee. And there is no obligation, as you were saying, to go. And I'm very, very concerned about this, as a lot of the wealth creators around the UK. And
uncertainty is bad for tax collection.
Absolutely.
Because when I was speaking to somebody the other day who, a member of his family, had left because he'd heard about the exit tax. Mm-hmm. And if you hear an exit tax is coming in 3 weeks, you leave today, don't you? You don't wait until it's come in. Absolutely.
And there are 2 points to that as well. Now, you could bring in an exit tax, and lots of countries have them. The problem is, and we've seen the Send tax thing today come in and say, suggesting this great idea. The problem is it's a deterrence to people moving to the UK. If they want to start a company here, they want to use the English legal system, access our fantastic financial services in the city, or access our fantastic workforce. People won't want to come in and start up businesses.
But isn't that why they should pay the tax and lump it? The fantastic workforce, the legal system, the English language, even the time zone, even the fact the sun always shines in Somerset, that they have wonderful opportunities being in the United Kingdom. It's a great place to do business. The quid pro quo is it's slightly higher tax than France or Germany, which are not wonderful places to do business.
And yet people are moving out anyway, Jacob. This is the big concern. Now, look at Italy, right? We never saw Italy as this kind of, they've got about a quarter of the millionaires we do. We look at the data. However, we're seeing more and more people go to Italy because it's really easy to move there with their tax jurisdiction. You pay 200,000 euros and you're a non-dom, and that's fine. Whereas you must jump through all these different loopholes in the UK. It scares people. It's complicated, and as you said, it's uncertain.
But isn't there a fairness argument that people on PAYE have no choice? They've got to pay their tax. It gets taken out of their salary every month. They have to pay the VAT. They can't avoid it, and the petrol duty. And they see these non-doms, these rich, fat cats getting the cream and not paying any tax or paying a lower tax rate than they are. That's really infuriating, isn't it, to British citizens?
Absolutely, of course it's infuriating. I'm on PAYE, I can't just jump around the world, but the way I look at this is you can either live in the real world or you can live in, essentially, and by what I mean by that is, we can do this tax policy and they can leave. And as you said, they'll take their investments with them, they'll take jobs, they'll take the ideas with them. And let's not forget, this is a knowledge economy. We need those people to stay and we need to incentivise them to come here.
One final thought. It's no surprise to me as a Conservative that this is what Rachel Reeves is trying to do. She's a socialist. That's what socialists do. What on earth was going on with Conservative governments doing this? This seems so fundamentally antithetic to Conservative principles.
Well, looking back to the spring budget, I think it was political. It was to shoot the fox. Essentially, Labour said they were going to do that for a long time. And as we know, the former Prime Minister's wife, Rishi Sunak's wife, is a non-dom. And it was a big point for the media. And I think that was what was really driving that policy to come forward and shoot the fox. But here we are, just like with the smoking ban, for example, it's going to get made much worse.
If you try shooting foxes, you end up shooting yourself in the foot. Thank you very much to Maxwell. 4 becomes 3. Sounds like an Enid Blyton book. Tom Tugendhat bounds out of the Conservative leadership race after failing to secure the backing of his parliamentary colleagues. What do the final 3 need to do to reign victorious with both the Tory faithful and with the country at large?
Martin Daubney. Weekdays from 3 p.m.
Please tell me that we're British. In our darkest hour, we can work around this. The beer will still be flowing at Christmas. Tell me, please.
Martin, without using bad language, there's no words to describe that this is another major blow to the hospitality sector. I wake up every day with anxiety thinking, what's going to happen to us now? Oh my God, now the weather's against us. Not only are the government absolutely battering us, then the weather's now hitting us as well.
Kate Stewart, this can only mean one thing. Prices, once again, going through the roof.
And there's nothing we can do. We have on costs. We have to buy from the brewery. We have the VAT. We have then the VAT, what we take. It is an absolute nightmare. To be in the pub game now, Martin, is very, very difficult. And there's no light at the end of the tunnel. Everything just keeps hammering us from every different direction. And obviously, we have to pass that on to the customers, then price increases. There's nothing we can do. We don't want to sell beer at an inflated price. We want it as cheap as possible to get people through them doors. But we have no option. They're going to go up again in the new budget. You know, there's no help for us. What are we supposed to do, Martin, except the only option is to close the doors and say, enough is enough. We can't do this anymore. I absolutely cry my eyes out having to put the prices up because you think, oh, my God, people are just going to turn away and walk. But we can't swallow the costs all the time, Martin. It's impossible for us to do because we will go bankrupt. There has to be, there's inflation getting hammered on us yet again, and we have to pass it on. I feel it when I take my children out for something to eat. You're like, wow, that has just cost a fortune. But what is the answer? The answer is the government needs to look at saving the hospitality sector and stop being so greedy in everything that they take away from us, or there won't be pubs.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and it's time for your Mail Moggs. We've been discussing the exodus of millionaires from Britain, so keep Mail Moggs coming in, Mail Mogg at GB News. But Steve has said, Jacob, and Steve makes a right point, you don't make the poor rich by making the rich poor. Graham, Rachel Reeves claims to have worked for the Bank of England. She wouldn't know a Laffer curve from a chocolate digestive. I think that's an excellent point. And Stephen, tax should be an optimisation problem, not a political issue. Unfortunately, socialists have never understood this. Thank you for those, I think, all excellent points. 4 becomes 3. Tom Tugendhat bows out of the Conservative leadership race after failing to secure sufficient backing from members of Parliament. James Cleverly has stormed ahead of Robert Jenrick in this afternoon's third round and leaving Kemi in third place at the moment, but very close between second and third. So the time edges nearer for 2 riders to have their fate decided by the loyal members. What do the final 3 need to do to reign victorious, first with the MPs tomorrow, then with the Tory faithful, and then with the country at large? And who should be most optimistic, and who would be best? Well, we can get the views of my most cantankerous panel, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the journalist and author, Michael Crick. Michael, let me come to you first, because you're a very long-standing political observer. You've seen lots of parties select leaders. What do you think the Tories should be doing at this stage as an observer rather than as a man of the left?
Well, I don't vote Conservative. I may have done once just because I like the candidate, but I think we need a strong opposition. I've always felt that, and therefore I think I would like the best person to be the leader of the party. So, and I think that is James Cleverly. I think the Conservative Party needs to move a little bit to the centre. I think on the whole, parties win elections from the centre. I think if they try and move to the right and try and battle it out with Nigel Farage and his party, you will get into even more trouble. So I think the great thing about Cleverly, and he sort of said it himself at the conference the other day, he's the most normal of the candidates. You know, you can think of yourself having a drink in the pub with James Cleverly, whereas, I mean, Robert Jenrick, I think, might do a bit of a starmer. In other words, he's making out he's quite right-wing now. Well, when I first knew him when he was standing for Newark in the by-election, I thought of him as a centrist then, and I suspect he would move back to the centre. So maybe he would fulfil my criteria, but we don't know. Whereas with Cleverly, I think, you know, where he stands now is where he is genuinely.
James is the most affable, but do you want the most normal person as a leader? Don't you want somebody who is extraordinary, a big figure, rather than somebody who's just a nice chap to have a drink in the pub with?
Well, I don't know who you mean by that, because do you mean Kemi Badenoch?
Well, Kemi is the most charismatic.
I think the trouble with Kemi Badenoch is she keeps putting her foot in it. I mean, at the conference, she made a whole series of gaffes which would have offended certain people, either, I forget what the gaffes were now, but one of them was referring to care workers, talking about care workers cleaning people's bottoms, which was pretty disrespectful to the care workers and actually pretty disrespectful to the people who live and whose relatives live in care homes. Now, that is potentially alienating a lot of voters.
Calvin, that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, Kemi says things, she's interesting, she's feisty, but too often she says things that damage her rather than help her.
Well, I think that it doesn't really matter who the leader of the Conservative Party is right now, to be frank with you, and they are a pretty lacklustre mob. The truth about the matter about Cleverly is that he's full of bonhomie, and that is about it. I asked Nigel Farage on the exit from of his show what he thought of Cleverly, and he said he's four square behind all, right? So actually, he doesn't really believe in anything, and that was the reason why he managed to have two of the great offices of state and had left no imprint at all behind him. So all I would say is I think this is a good opportunity, if he ends up being elected, a good opportunity for some kind of deal between Reform and the Conservatives, because Badenoch made her position quite clear, a plague on all your Reform houses. I think Jenrick pretends to be quite close, as you pointed out, pretends to be quite close towards Reform. And I think this is a very, very good time to be Nigel Farage, frankly. I think the Tories, if you look at this poll that came out today, the astonishing aspect was not that the Tories put on 4% since July. They could have had anybody running the Labour Party. They would have dropped 5%, as they turned out to be. But the Reform, instead of collapsing like the third in the race would normally do after an election, literally drop 5 points, put on 1. Honestly, it will be Reform who decides who will be the next leader of the Conservative Party and probably the next leader of our country.
But Cleverly was very dismissive of Reform. So in his speech at the conference, he was saying that Nigel and
he's a deal doer.
Okay.
Whereas Badenoch would literally be giving it that for 4 or 5 years. Directly Cleverly sees which way the wind is blowing on this. I'm sure he will be potentially talking about some kind of accommodation.
But this shows Cleverly to be a complete genius. He's persuaded Kelvin that he's the most right-wing and will do a deal with Reform, and he's persuaded Michael that he's the most centrist and will therefore appeal to the broadest church.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think the Conservatives have to go after those people who defected to the Lib Dems, the people who defected to Labour, and the people who did not vote at all. And you won't do that by moving to the right and doing accommodations with Nigel Farage. That will drive a lot more people into those camps.
Okay, if you take the numbers, 4 million went to Reform, 2.3 million went and stayed at home, didn't go anywhere. Only 700,000 to 800,000 went to Greens, Lib Dems and Labour combined. That's the smallest pool in which to fish in. That's why I think you've got to win over the Reform and the stay-at-home vote, most of whom thought we weren't Conservative enough.
Well, if you could win over, what was it, 4.1 that Reform got, all of those people, then that might work. But they're never going to win all of those people out, because some will be die-hard Reform people, whatever happens. Some will just abstain. So I think On the whole, people win elections on the centre ground.
You can't win over all the 700,000 who went to the Liberals.
No, I know, but I think it's more productive.
It's a smaller pool.
And then after a while, if you've been successful on the centre ground, you can probably win over a few Reform people as well.
The truth about the matter is that last general election, everybody hated the Conservatives so much they would vote for anybody. Right, and this now, I think he's just Cleverly is a holding pattern. And it would never surprise me, a very, very good friend, this will please you, a very good friend of mine who is a very, very good friend of Boris, said, don't even think about it. 2 years from today, suddenly the game will start to change as he starts to take over. And he doesn't believe in anything, and he'd do a deal with Farage in a heartbeat.
I have just come from earlier this evening at Boris's book launch, and Boris made a brilliant and charismatic speech. He explained how much better off we'd been if he'd still been Prime Minister, showed what a leader can do and how to motivate people. Do you think in 2 years' time Boris comes back?
Bonkers idea. And I think that's... But the part of the problem is that these three remaining candidates, they're all linked with the past government. And the reason why the Conservatives lost the election so badly, everybody was fed up with what went on under Johnson and Truss and so on. And I suspect the next leader of the Conservative Party will be somebody who we haven't even thought of, and may not even be an MP yet. The last three new people to become, to change government were Starmer, Cameron and Blair, and none of them had even held ministerial office.
True. Indeed, indeed. So it may be somebody as yet unborn.
Yes, that is true. I must say, on the Boris thing, although he made a terrible hash of some stuff, people's memories are social media memories. And they like Nobody can remember anything anymore. It's an astonishing aspect. After all, we've got a professor of English, I think, today saying that no student can read a book anymore and they're studying English at university. So on that basis, I believe that all his errors will disappear. And the terrible thing about Boris is he knows that. Boris Johnson, no, please. The man is a clown. He did so much damage.
Michael Crick has a nervous breakdown. We're going to move on.
And they'd never let him back into Parliament anyway because he's banned.
But they can't stop him.
They can't?
No, of course not. If you win an election, you can always go back.
But does that wipe the slate clean?
Of course it does. Think of James Wilkes.
Well, and that's outrageous. That's outrageous that Parliament can punish you and you resign. You don't have to pay the punishment.
It's a basic constitutional principle that the electorate have a right to be represented by who they choose, and Parliament cannot stop that. It's really fundamental. Anyway, coming up, the UK population has soared at its highest rate since the 1970s, entirely attributable to huge levels of immigration. How long can this go on before Britain bursts at the seams? And new rules will require new peerages to be justified in order to prevent cronyism. Is this Labour government really in a position to lecture us on this matter?
Good evening. Here's your latest GB News weather update coming to you from the Met Office. Looking ahead, and by Thursday, things are looking largely dry, but quite a bit colder than of late. For the time being, though, still plenty of wet weather around. Low pressure dominating the story across the UK. It's this low pressure that has brought all the heavy thundery showers many of us have seen through today, and there will be some further showers as we go through the next few hours across England and Wales, but many of them clearing away towards the east overnight. Some persistent rain continuing, though, across parts of northern England and eastern Scotland, so staying pretty soggy here. With quite a bit of cloud around, temperatures won't drop a huge amount, especially in the towns and cities, many places holding up in double figures. There will be generally fewer showers around tomorrow, but there will be some. In fact, even from the start across far southern parts of England, a few showers quite likely, perhaps a little bit drier across central southern parts of Wales and the Midlands for a time, but further north, northern England, plenty of wet weather around, some outbreaks of rain which could be quite heavy, and more persistent rain affecting eastern parts of Scotland. A very soggy start to the day here. As we go through the day, the rain across parts of Scotland and northern England will continue for a time, but it should start to break up as we go through into the afternoon and early evening. Elsewhere, a scattering of showers around, not as many as we've seen through today, and they're not looking quite as intense, less likely to have the odd rumble of thunder, but still some heavy ones possible. And temperatures in the north starting to drop down as we get a northerly wind making its way across the country. That northerly wind then will push its way southwards across pretty much the whole of the country as we go through Thursday, and so that means it is going to be a chillier day, but much fewer showers around. In fact, it's looking largely dry. Yes, some showers around coastal parts, but many places having a dry day on Thursday and sticking with that drier theme until the weekend. Bye-bye.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark meets and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation and time for the Mel Moggs. We were discussing the Tory leadership and Roger says Michael Crick is wrong. Roger, you're a brave man. James Cleverly is not the right man to lead the Tories. Nigel Farage is. Then we can get Labour out. And that deserves 4 exclamation marks. Andrew, just a tad off topic from your current topics, but can you tell me what actual benefits to the UK does the UK get, apart from being the lapdog to the USA? Let's face it, Biden is actually anti-Brit anyway. Cheers and love the show. Yeah, I do think Biden is anti-UK. We must have a discussion on the special relationship someday. New data from the Office for National Statistics show the UK population has risen at its fastest level since the early 1970s. The number of people living in the UK grew by 1%, 68.3 million in the year to mid-2023, with the steep rise being driven wholly by net migration, as there were in fact more deaths than births in the country for the first time in 50 years. This boom in migration numbers comes as it's revealed the ECHR has allowed an Albanian criminal back into the UK despite him having previously been deported by His Majesty's government. How can Britain's infrastructure and way of life cope with such numbers? And how can we ever solve it without getting back full control of our borders? Well, my panel is still with me, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the journalist and author, Michael Crick. Kelvin, these figures show basically what we knew, that the numbers are increasing in an out-of-control manner, and the efforts to reduce migration not working.
Not working. That particular case involving the Albanian criminal is an absolute shocker. Here's the guy. He gets 2.5 years for a couple of burglaries. Albanian, after 6 months, claims that he's got some ill relative back in Albania, manages to persuade the prison system that he can go out there. He goes out there, sneaks back into, so he's deported, comes back into the country, and back in the country immediately impregnates his girlfriend, right? She has the baby. Directly he has the baby. Then he goes to see his lawyer and says, ECHR, here I come. My human rights will be damaged because I've now got a child. So we are not talking about some rather dim thicko. We're talking about somebody planning it. Surely ECHR in itself comes under the most incredible scrutiny under that. Now, I'm not saying that our numbers and this are completely linked, but honestly, anybody from the rest of Europe and the rest of the world who wants to come in and march into our country now seems to be able to do it.
Well, and it matches with the figures that lots of people are coming in and overstaying visas. So actually, illegal migration isn't coming over in small boats. That's a small part of the problem. It's people who apply for a visa, they come here on holiday, and then they don't go. And that we need to have some system that has exit controls and make sure we follow up on people who've come in.
Well, I'm afraid to say I increasingly think we should have identity cards. I think that would make the system better. I mean, I accept we cannot cope with our population going up at the rate of about 300,000 or 200,000 a year. I mean, that is going to take up all the extra houses that Labour almost certainly will not build anyway.
700,000 a year.
I know. Well, that was 1 year. I mean, it has now started to come down again. But even so, and of course, one of the reasons why it's going up is because many businesses can't get the labour they need. People, they still need, jobs are available.
But people who are coming in illegally aren't allowed to work.
No, but they're almost certainly.
Somebody ought to tell Deliveroo that, by the way.
Sorry?
Somebody ought to tell Deliveroo that.
But there are big fines for companies.
Yeah, there are, but they seem to be able to. There's a quite clever way that they can swap their bike, swap who's on their bike. But the issue for our country.
All right, we better be careful because we have no evidence about Deliveroo.
No, there was a big investigation in the Sunday Times the other month. But on the question of the numbers in our country. I saw a number the other day. It was Oxford. There are 18 institutions got together under Oxford's Compass Group to look at it. There were 700. They estimated that there are up to 745,000 illegals in our country. That's over the 225,000 seeking asylum. Right? That is a city the size of Leeds, right? And we know nothing about them. How are they living? What are they doing? That point you make about overstaying their visas. And you're right, the numbers coming in actually via Dover are minuscule compared to the literally coming into our country and then disappearing into the system. And what I can't understand is we've got a Labour government now which doesn't even bother to talk about it. So at least the Tories talked about it and did nothing about it. Now we have Labour who actually say, well, we're not quite sure what the problem is. Or how are we going to solve it? So they get a police officer to run it.
Labour are talking about it more than they used to, and they have come up with various policy proposals. Personally, I just don't see they're going to work. I mean, smashing the gangs, well, we've always believed in smashing the gangs, and it's very difficult to smash the gangs. And the fact that you're a bit nicer to the European Union than the last government was, I don't think it's going to make a huge amount of difference. I think we have to accept that there is going to be high immigration into this country for the foreseeable future, and it's likely to get higher in the long term as climate change starts to bite. Well, is already biting in those parts of the world.
If that happens, Farage will win by a country mile.
That's quite a leap. Anyway, under new rules being drafted by the government, political parties will soon be required to justify the peerages they offer in a move to address concerns over cronyism, such as appointments made by Harold Wilson in his famous Lavender List and by Tony Blair, who was interviewed by police accused of selling peerages. The new process, similar to when people receive honours, would force parties to explain why nominees are suitable. This overhaul comes as Labour has proposed reducing the size of the House of Lords and even hinted at abolishing it altogether. But is Labour really in a position to be lecturing the public on cronyism? Let's go back to my panel, Kelvin Mackenzie and Michael Crick. Michael, there's a comment of Lord Melbourne about the Garter, and he says the great thing about the Garter is that there's no damned merit in it. And trying to pretend that this is all very meretricious is simply not true. People get appointed to the Lords to make sure their party has sufficient numbers, and then a very small number of very distinguished people become crossbench peers.
The important thing, I mean, the Lords now plays probably a more important role in our legislature than ever before, in that the Commons doesn't scrutinise most legislation properly. The Lords has to scrutinise it, identify all the flaws, get things corrected, and so on. The trouble with the current system is it's bonkers. Well, for a start, as you've suggested, peerages are sold. All the parties are guilty of this in order to boost their party funds. Bribes are handed out. I mean, for instance, Blair handed out basically to persuade people to give up their seats just before an election.
Call that a bribe.
Yes, it is. You're saying if you give up your seat, don't worry, we'll give you a place in the Lords. And you're appointing people to this chamber for life. I mean, Charlotte Owen, who was appointed 29 when she was appointed. Yes. I mean, this is not meant to be a personal attack on her, but she could be a member of the House of Lords for the next 80 years. I mean, she's quite, she's quite likely to live to 110, given how young she is now.
Lord Alley was appointed in his 30s, yes, and now he's suddenly in the midst of political controversy.
So it's absolutely vital that we do get proper scrutiny. And What should happen is that the parties should say, or the Cabinet office should say, these are the people we're inclined to appoint to the House of Lords. Give the public 6 months and the media 6 months or 3 months or whatever to scrutinise these people and decide whether they're suitable. That would be better than the current incredibly secretive and corrupt system that goes on.
What do you do if you want to have somebody like David Cameron come back as Foreign Secretary? Do you have a fast track for people like that?
Well, maybe you could say that somebody who was served in the Commons doesn't need to be, because they've had all the scrutiny.
Had all the scrutiny. But isn't the truth, Kelvin, that the House of Lords somehow or another works, and that we might just as well leave it as it is, and all these pretences that they'll make about saying somebody's a worthy individual, they always pretend they're worthy individuals regardless.
This is the whole point about being Labour, isn't it, right now? Everything has to be all nice and clean and polished, and if we're going to have change, what was that? 30 grand for some suits. Oh, I didn't know that. They will be up to their neck in everything. And I agree with Michael, right? Each side has been doing this. For instance, as a woman sits on the crossbenches, my old chum, Baroness Udin, right?
Yes.
Who, after all, was kicked out for 18 months for pocketing 125 grand for a flat that actually she'd never been into. So she is a much bigger disgrace today, in my view, than, for instance, any Viscount or Duke that happens to be sitting there because of some ancient...
And who paid half of her money back?
Our old chum, Lord Alley.
Lord Alley.
Right? So they're all at it. The Baroness Udin case, by the way, would be enough for as I was Prime Minister, for me to shut down the House of Lords, a complete disgrace, and the fact she's not in jail is unbelievable.
Well, there we go. Forthright views, as always, from my most cantankerous panel. Coming up, and it's a pity they're not staying for this, because new research shows the over 57s. And I think both Kelvin and Michael are a little bit over 57.
Whereas you're only 55, yes?
Are facing disadvantages when seeking employment. Can we afford to be discarding talented workforce like this? Shoot.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
You could, if you're getting a bit bored later on and you've got some free time, tune in to Friends. Do you remember that?
It's on somewhere in the world all the time.
Probably one of those
incredible.
Obscure TV channels.
It's a big anniversary today, because apparently today was 30 years ago, was when it first hit the screens.
In 1994. Just before, or just after I was born, 89 me. The show ran for 10 series, becoming one of the most popular sitcoms of all time, and it scored numerous accolades, including 62 Primetime Emmy nominations. Joining us now in the studio to talk everything Friends and the big anniversary is showbiz reporter Steph Tetchy and my friend as well.
Happy Friends-iversary, guys. Yes, today is quite a monumental day for one of the most incredible sitcoms to ever hit our TV screens.
That it's on somewhere in the world.
There's millions of people around the world who are watching reruns, watching either streaming of Friends, and it doesn't get boring for people. I think, 30 years later, just that it's such a simple concept. 6 New Yorkers just following their lives and their friendships. It proved a hit with loads of viewers worldwide.
The casting was super.
It was so incredible, and the thing is, these were all fresh faces at the time. It wasn't like they picked people who were at the top of the game then. And I think it was such a hit with viewers is because they became our friends as well over the years. But obviously today is played with a bit of poignancy because, there is one friend that is missing. And the creators of the show, Martha Kaufman and David Crane, saying that today is a bit fraught for both the cast because of Matthew Perry's passing. And he was known as one of the funniest friends, as most people would describe him as. And so today is kind of marred with sadness.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about.
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry, Tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
New research by Total Jobs reveals workers aged 57 and over are increasingly being overlooked by employers, with this figure being the average age at which candidates are considered too old for many roles. A third of over 50s are worried they will struggle to find employment, with 1 in 7 already rejected because of their age. This is despite the fact that these workers represent £138 billion in economic output, and with talent shortages affecting many industries, the exclusion of older workers could have significant consequences for both businesses and the broader economy. As the population ages and productivity declines, can the economy afford to discard this experienced segment of the workforce? Well, I'm really pleased to be joined now by the HR expert and employment lawyer, Amanda Lennon. Amanda, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Is it legal to discriminate against this way in people aged 57 and over?
No, it's not. This constitutes direct age discrimination, which is unlawful in the UK. But sadly, this issue is something that I'm hearing more and more about in my network. People who are hitting their late 40s, early 50s and are being declined from roles. They're not even being given interviews in some cases because of their age, because employers have a policy of recruiting younger people, which...
Isn't this a mistake? Because everything I hear is that older people often have a very strong work ethic, they obviously have experience, and that they bring something extra to businesses which millennials may not have the same enthusiasm for.
I completely agree with you. And often with the more senior roles, strategic experience is required, which can really only be gained through a certain number of years' work and exposure to broad areas of business, for example. So I think it's unrealistic to expect people who are much earlier on in their careers to undertake those sorts of roles. And it's short-sighted of employers if they're going to discount a large swathe of potential candidates because of their age.
And we're going to need, as retirement age rises, people working into their late 60s now, but well into their 70s, probably, as the decades pass. And therefore, actually, people at 57 may have 15 years of useful work still in them for an employer.
Absolutely. And those who are younger in their careers will likely have even more time left to work before they're able to retire.
Yeah, well, it seems to me it's a great mistake. As I'm 55, I'm getting rather worried that I'm about to be put on the shelf, but I hope I will keep going for a little bit longer. Amanda, thank you so much for joining me in this important discussion.
Thank you, Jacob.
In today's trash-tastic news, a Dutch museum had a close brush with disaster. Well, if you can call it that, narrowly rescuing what can only be described as a modern masterpiece. Wait for it, 2 empty beer cans. That's right, the country that gave us Rembrandt and Vermeer now brings us discarded tins and charges you for the privilege of witnessing it. The so-called artwork, entitled All the Good Times We Spent Together, was lovingly hand-painted by French artist Alexander Lavette. But in a twist only modern art could provide, a museum mechanic, well done that man, mistook these meticulously crafted cans for real rubbish and did what any reasonable person would do. He threw them in the bin, and being Holland, he probably put it in the recycling. Luckily, or unluckily, as the case may be, the curator swooped in like Batman from a catastrophe movie and rescued the artwork just before it reached its final resting place, and not in the recycling, but at the local landfill. The museum has now placed these beer cans on a pedestal where presumably they can get the respect they deserve. I wonder if it was Heineken, because Heineken refreshes the artwork that other beers cannot reach. Anyway, museum staff insist that this was all part of their grand plan to make us see everyday objects in a new light. Though, if that's the case, I'm starting to see my wheelie bin as a treasure trove of artistic genius. The moral of the story, in the modern world, anything can be art, even your trash can. But I wonder how much you can sell it for. Sounds like good business. That's all from me. Up next, it's the great Patrick Christys. Patrick, what's on your bill of fare this evening?
Oh, I used to carry those two things around in my work bag. Anyway, right, population growth, massive. Can you get a GP appointment? Can your kid get a place at school? Can you get on the housing ladder? Probably not. Why? Mass immigration. Keir Starmer has been referred to police over the electoral register issue. What will happen there? Will he have to resign? The ECHR allowing a load of foreign judges to stay in Britain, thanks to judges like... foreign criminals, thanks to judges like people from San Marino. Why are we pandering to a minnow nation? Millionaires are leaving. Dawn Butler thinks everything is racist, and we're going to go live to Florida at Hurricane Milton hit.
Well, that all sounds very exciting, Patrick, particularly the story on the Reverend Starmer. That will be coming up after the weather. I will be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this has been State of the Nation. As I'm sure you know, the weather in Somerset would be fantastic. There may be rain in London, but in Somerset it will be absolutely lovely, a perfect autumn day.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Here's your latest GB News weather update coming to you from the Met Office. Looking ahead, and by Thursday, things are looking largely dry, but quite a bit colder than of late. For the time being, though, still plenty of wet weather around. Low pressure dominating the story across the UK. It's this low pressure that has brought all the heavy thundery showers many of us have seen through today, and there will be some further showers as we go through the next few hours across England and Wales, but many of them clearing away towards the east overnight. Some persistent rain continuing, though, across parts of northern England and eastern Scotland, so staying pretty soggy here. With quite a bit of cloud around, temperatures won't drop a huge amount, especially in the towns and cities, many places holding up in double figures. There will be generally fewer showers around tomorrow, but there will be some. In fact, even from the start across far southern parts of England, a few showers quite likely, perhaps a little bit drier across central southern parts of Wales and the Midlands for a time, but further north, northern England, plenty of wet weather around, some outbreaks of rain which could be quite heavy, and more persistent rain affecting eastern parts of Scotland. A very soggy start to the day here. As we go through the day, the rain across parts of Scotland and northern England will continue for a time, but it should start to break up as we go through into the afternoon and early evening. Elsewhere, a scattering of showers around, not as many as we've seen through today, and they're not